We are kicking off 2026 with our top tech trends, as we normally do. Joining us today is Kyle, our CEO and President, Todd, our COO and CISO, and Nate, our Director of Cybersecurity. So we kind of made a joke before I hit record that everything we're talking about today is AI. So I'm going to challenge you in this first one, other than AI, because we're definitely diving into that. What is something else you're looking forward to, a trend or a concern? Give us your quick little overview that you see for 2026. Robots? Yeah.
I'll maybe take one that we've recommended in the past because we still see the trend continue.
Yep.
And then maybe we, transition to actual stuff that's, the future trend,
Yep.
not just the continuation of the trend. And I'm going to sound like I'm beating the horse again, this has been a recommendation for at least the last 2 years is getting rid of the VPNs, right? Moving towards some type of zero trust network access solution. But I bring that up because I do a lot of incident response, and the only critical incident response that we've continued to help, with is, other than like email compromises and stuff, is VPN compromises, and it does not matter the vendor. WatchGuard just had a big one. SonicWall just had a big one. FortiGate had some as well. Alto. So you name your firewall. It is a publicly exposed port that is a high value target with often lax controls once you do authenticate in to be able to access the rest of the network. And so it's something that is probably the single most thing I'm passionate about trying to get rid of here. And I think the big thing is it just requires a different type of budget and strategy, right? The user experience is typically actually better for your end users than a traditional VPN because they don't have to constantly be re-authenticate and, multi-factor prompts. So better user experience, just different budgeting cycle and more secure. It's a really important thing to get rid of. But the number of compromises that we see with these VPNs is only increasing as they continue to be a hot target. So that's why I wanted to pick on that one. Is we've made the recommendations for at least the last 2 years. It's continuing to ramp up in terms of severity. And also I started to see it come through on insurance renewals for cybersecurity insurance, as they're asking, do you have a VPN and do you have some type of ZTNA or zero trust network access solution in place to try and mitigate that threat? So the insurance companies know this is a major incident. They didn't necessarily do that 2 years ago, but they have started in the past year.
I mean, if you think about it, the insurance organizations are really designed to mitigate risk, and that's why they're asking those questions. I don't think this is a trend per se, but I agree with where Nate's going is I think it's time to start considering re-architecting your network, and that's the zero trust to me. Is the reason why I say it's time is because if you look at how the world has changed over the last 5 to 10 years with people going more cloud-based, there's more things that are people working from home, et cetera, et cetera. The network, the traditional networks, is just not designed to actually protect the way it used to. And so the cost and the effort that goes into re-architecting all of it is significant. So starting to build a plan, I think, is critical for this year. But since Nate brought it up, I'm going to throw a different one in there. And I'm super intrigued by this one. I actually think we're probably pretty close to getting into augmented reality. I say finally, because I was talking to Nate earlier today when I worked at a previous organization, and I want to say this was 15 years ago. One of the things I wanted to do was build some sort of augmented reality tool set that would allow us with our production process and how we did manufacturing. And the tech just didn't exist. And I was like, boy, we're so close. And here we are 10, 15 years later. And I actually think we are really close now. So there's all kinds of wearables we can get into in a little bit, but we're right around the time of CES, and Google just did their announcement on their AR solution. I think they call it XR. So anyways, long story short, I think that's one of the things you're actually going to see really kind of start to take off this year.
I think the wearables in general, I mean, that's everything you're hearing coming out of CES right now is wearables, AI, and robots. I mean, that seems to be the trends, and then some foldable TVs and something like that. I think there's always some TV tech, but yeah, I think the ability that I know Amazon announced last year that they're equipping drivers with AR glasses sides on those. So Amazon's starting to engage that in their level side of it. They have some custom built glasses for their sides. That's so kind of your talk point there, Todd. And I think there's that old marketing industry side of giving, workers that augmented reality side of that to speed up production and put some things, contextually in front of them is definitely going to start to appear more and more often. So whether we're just on the front side of it, but I think it's finally come. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, Todd and I were talking a little bit before as well related to wearable tech and that just becoming common, right? So sitting next to me, they're in the charging case, but I have like the Meta glasses, right? These are my prescription, glasses, sunglasses, all that type of stuff. When they first came out, people are, sometimes a little resistant on it, but now even as I'm walking around, I see other people wearing, other smart glasses as well. And no one really bats an eye these days, right? Unless you see a flashing light saying I'm recording, right? But typically that doesn't happen. But yeah, just being able to wear it, get notifications on your glasses that someone's calling you, texting you. Sometimes I feel a little odd, I'll be wearing them and taking a call and people don't see anything in my ears and I'm just talking to myself. So people think I'm a crazy person, in the grocery store when, my spouse is asking me to pick something up. But I think
Where to find that?
yeah, yeah. But like there's more and more wearable tech that's coming out. Kyle, Todd, and I were just talking about this about glasses that have a teleprompter on it, so you can give keynote presentations without looking like you're reading off a teleprompter. Smart rings are a pretty commonplace at this point for health biometric markings, and so there's a lot more tech that's coming out. Apple's with their new AirPods wanting to do live translations. And so they're trying to keep the tech, in your ears, on your face more and more and more because people don't typically, it's almost taboo to pull out your phone in the middle of a meeting and not necessarily look at your watch or, maybe get a notification on your glasses. So the tech is just becoming more integrated with expected normal behaviors.
OpenAI came out with, they announced their leak of their hardware project that Johnny Ives, joined in their hardware initiative sides of those. And it's supposedly the early leak on it. Again, it's probably going to be greatly different than what leaked out, but it was like a pen style device with a mic and a camera side with it. But it's in a pen form factor, no screen at all. They basically have been adamant saying it's not going to have a screen. Screen is not what this is for. It's not the future of the AI, but they did pronounce and say that they believe, the larger future of AI is not in chat and text. It's in hardware. It's integrated. And I think that's kind of where they view that coming. And I think it all pumps back again, the contextual requirement of AI to get those sides is the more it can be a purview to conversations and the surroundings of those things, the more augmentative it can be to the individual sides of those to truly kind of be that assistant because it has the full contextual side of those come through. So I think that's definitely where you see, and that's kind of what's come out of CES. It is interesting because, the early wearable stuff that's come out has been kind of lackluster and been met with a lot of resistance. Kind of need touched on that a little bit where people are going to be concerned about people wearing these Meta glasses and those things on it. But yet all the main big players out there, your Apples, Googles, OpenAI and Meta and everybody is all moving to hardware. They all have strong hardware initiative sides of those. So I think it's going to radically change. And I think what will be considered, it'll be considered more normal, like Nate alluded to. I think it's already started, and I think that'll just continue to move on. It'll just be the adapting to people to say, the courtesy sides, if there's a light side of those, to know that, if personal privacy stuff still needs to be addressed through all this side of it, of how that gets handled. So there's always those things to figure out, but it's definitely in process and definitely seems to be where all the excitement is building around.
You skirted the line right on what I wanted to talk about with wearable tech was privacy and kind of normal expectations. So, but related to business. And so I think the big thing was, typically in an office space, you're talking a lot about intellectual property, trade secrets, all that type of stuff. And as wearable tech becomes more commonplace, because again, if I'm wearing my glasses, unless I say start recording and whatnot, right? But maybe it is, again, the smart pen in the pocket, or, the ring or anything like that, is a lot of organizations are trying to, do live transcriptions, or, take meeting notes and, take that elsewhere to follow up later with, better rich, details. But as the wearable tech becomes more commonplace, as a business, you do possibly have more exposure as well, because now you're possibly taking your trade secrets, intellectual property, that type of stuff, and exposing it to other third party, unsanctioned applications that have your data now, right? So if you are going to be talking about those super critical items, maybe Kyle, while you're in a board meeting, it's hey, we request that you turn off your smart gear, right? That this might have to be conversations that have to be made in board meetings, or,
You're going to get the body scanners as you walk into
Yeah.
boardrooms. They'll detect if you're wearing something, right? It's like,
so at least,
okay,
at least being
pocket.
aware your data may leave, right?
I agree. I was going to bring up the phrasing that I've heard a lot is the death of the smartphone, which is really kind of interesting to think about, because it's such a heavy ecosystem of our lives today of how much you use that. But they are saying that this is going away. The privacy thing is a really great conversation too. If you're a nerd like myself and are concerned about security and whatnot, even having that type of technology with you when you go see the doctor, even if it's sitting on a chair because you're in a gown or whatever, it still has the potential to be recording all of that information while you're in the meeting, and you may be requested, or you may see at some point that the healthcare industry decides that it's banned and they shut it down for you automatically. It'll be really interesting to see how that goes. Now, that isn't going to be a trend you'll see come to fruition this year, but it is coming.
Yeah, obviously the business environment is different. It's got a lot of different use case sides for it. On the personal side, though, I mean, when I think through it, I mean, people have been putting Alexas in their homes for years now. And I mean, Norquarms, this thing's always listening. And I think everybody knows too. I mean, there's always suspicions that your phone is always listening as well, and has been for quite a while. When you say certain things and all of a sudden you're getting ads 2 days later, you're like, how did it know that? There's enough thing. I think people have come accustomed to that side of it. A little desensitized is probably the right words, but definitely in the business scenario side of it, I hate to be on Todd's shoes and Nate's shoes side of it, figuring out, the data side, because there's a lot of things coming in that current policies and procedures just don't have the ability to address right now. And it's, there's a lot coming in. It's changing very, very rapidly. So it's going to be an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this just naturally makes me want to talk about AI. So here we go. Game on. And we'll get into it, because I think we made it 15 minutes. That was a good show. I liked it. But when it comes to all the policy procedures and whatnot, AI is going to be a huge thing. And the reason why I bring it up is because I think there is a lot of legislation that is going to be coming on. In the US, the current administration has really tried to tamp that down and saying no holds barred, go crazy. The further we can get ahead with AI, the better. However, the EU is the complete opposite. They are saying you've got to be concerned about privacy. You've got to be concerned about where the data resides, et cetera, et cetera. And there are all kinds of security threats, which I'm sure Nate and I will get into in a future podcast. But there is legislation in place already. And so while the US may be going wild, wild west on it, your Googles, your Metas, et cetera, they are still obeying the rules and saying, if I'm going down this path and this is an enterprise solution, how am I protecting that? And just kind of a bit of a tangent off of that. I was talking to Kyle last week about how I was really impressed with the way that Gemini works and ChatGPT work and how they get to know you. And he made the point, well, you realize that's because you have a personal account. You don't have an enterprise account. And I was like, no, I actually didn't put those two things together. But now that you mentioned it, how obvious could it be? And where that comes to fruition is, because that's true, and you look at GDPRs or other privacy regulations that are out there, having personal information like that is not currently in focus of what people can do. And so the even though the regulations in the US aren't there today, they are other places, and the AI organizations are following those rules.
There's so much change coming through those sides. And I think when you go into the AI side through 2026, it's going to be, you're hearing more and more of the labs that are talking through on not model enhancement now. They're looking more into, the features of memory and the actual, use of it. They're all pretty much saying, look, we're not even tapping, a deep percentage of what the current models are capable of. It's like, you don't need smarter models. You need better use of the models, and you'll drive a lot more value side is where a lot of the sets going to. So I think there's an optimizations period that they're alluding to get through those things in a use case, period side of those, to make it, the use of it be far more valuable to the users beyond the standard, chat interface. They're moving away from the chat into operating systems and into full, systems deployment side of those. And I think that's what 2026 is going to manifest itself out. There'll still be gradual, incremental model improvements. I think what we saw from ChatGPT at the end of 25 with the 5.0 to the 5.1 to the 5.2 in a really relatively, all within a quarter period side of it. They had 3 releases inside of those. I think that will be starting to be mirrored by a lot of the other labs as well. Say, we'll do these incremental improvements. We'll continue to tune the model sides of these things, but not these mass releases, but we're going to focus on optimizations and use of these models and getting them into, orchestration and deliverable value out to the users in those different areas, sides of that. I think that's what we'll see.
Yeah, I'm sure most people are familiar with the phrase LLM, which is large language models. One of the things that you're going to start to see this year is going to be what's referred to as SLMs, which is small language models. And Kyle kind of touched on this earlier too, is that's the type of stuff you're going to see on devices. So getting into your robotics and those types of things. I mean, one of the easiest examples is if you watch Elon Musk's Optimus Prime, you can get a pretty good idea of where this is long-term going.
Yeah, that ties into the other thing you hear is the world models that are being built outside of those. Is they're kind of a liking where the world models is the awareness of the physical world that we live in itself, beyond just the text and the knowledge of the internet, and training and getting model awareness of the actual physical world that things live in. And that's where the robotics will really start to evolve, as it does require, the awareness of something's falling off a shelf, it's going to go down here, the 3-dimensional view of the physics of the world that we live in, and how things interact, to go through those things. And you're seeing now a lot of these labs are starting to spin up and go through that. It's moving kind of where you look where the LLMs were in like 2012, 2015, it's kind of where the world models are today. But I would expect a much shorter timeline, given the fact that they're using obviously AI to help with these things. And as they build those out, you start having world models, trained world models, and these things, they're able to simulate those without having to have a physical video recording of every action that goes through. They can simulate it enough to train the world models on what goes through. It's fundamentally what the Teslas are using, is a world model with their vision. Side of those is what they're training the cars to do autonomous driving. It's where the autonomous cars are coming from. It's what NVIDIA is building out as world model sides for their autonomous car operating system sides of those. But that's going to be a very large market to kind of evolve through. And not necessarily, I think it'll be just incorporated into what we use and buy, not something you just, you're not going to go out and subscribe to a world model. That I don't think is what it'll be, but it'll be a big part of what we use in its effectiveness.
Well, and NVIDIA is now designing and manufacturing chips dedicated to computer vision on vehicles, right? These are dedicated hardware that will be sold to the car manufacturers. So the one thing that I did want to touch on a little bit was just jumping back to, some of the privacy, and just, we mentioned the word legislation, I believe is in there. And the thing that I wanted to mention is I think this will be a big year of legislation related to AI in general and privacy. Is we've already seen some of these big AI providers get sued for, maybe assisting and with suicide and, stuff like that. There's another one under fire about images being generated for minors, right? And so there's the governance that has to be done on these. So we're seeing big lawsuits coming out of that. We see sometimes public hesitation for these data centers to go into their local community. And so we're seeing, lawsuits or conversations happening to try and block these data centers from going in. Energy increases in neighborhoods where these data centers may be going in. So we might be able to see some more lawsuits coming out related to that type of activity. And so I just foresee 2026 to be a big year of legislation, and then possibly even at a national level, moving through its way with Congress and everything like that. I'll touch on it. I don't want to touch on politics. This is a mid-year, so there's going to be a lot of elections happening. Fakes are very, very good these days. And so I just have to say, be aware of what you see on social media, because across the spectrum, there will be deepfakes on both sides trying to influence an election cycle. We saw it in the elections in the past as well. Reminder, deepfakes to influence elections is illegal, so don't do that. Deepfakes in general are not, but to influence an election, they are. So be aware of what you see on TV. But as AI is becoming so good, Kyle, you and I could talk about how good Nano Banana is on Gemini, right? And creating images and videos, and it's really powerful, and they can create some very compelling images.
Wasn't going to plan on getting into this just yet, but I feel like I have to step in real briefly at least. And there is something that's coming along, and you will see it this year. It's called AI Digital Provenance. And what the intent of this is basically being able to help people figure out, is this AI or is it not? And so what you're starting to look at when it comes to it, and it's not really fully there yet, but what you'll start to see is there'll be, for all intents and purposes, a data lineage, which means I have the ability to know where did this originate, how did it get altered if it did, those types of things. And whether they do that through, bounce back a couple of years when blockchain was all the rage, you'll start to see those kinds of things start to come to fruition. Watermarking. I mean, for example, you probably see Sora on stuff on social media. That'd be a good indicator that this isn't real. Those kinds of things. It's definitely going to come out, and it's going to come out in a pretty big way this year, just because, as Nate mentioned, it has to be in there to kind of help mitigate the concerns from false information, making sure there's fairness. Ultimately, in a cybersecurity world, we want to do that because we want to build trust, governance, those types of things anyway. But it is going to be a huge thing for this year that you'll see. I was also going to throw in there, before I forget, if you haven't seen it already, there will be a massive spike in pricing for memory for computers. And Nate had a statistic earlier that I forget, is OpenAI was going
OpenAI committed to 40% of the global RAM. So they have big contracts with NVIDIA it was Samsung and another manufacturer. But yeah, they've secured 40% of the global RAM to be able to support their data centers.
Yeah, that's just one of them.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it's going to go multiple years, what they're saying, and seeing through 2027 at least. I think it's just until they can ramp up additional capacities, which doesn't obviously happen overnight. This is going to be a multi-year problem again to get through it. And I'm sure from the supplier side that once they build these things out, I mean, they obviously need to keep refreshing hardware, but it's not going to scale at this level, so they can't overbuild. So it is going to just be a supply and demand problem for a period of time here for sure. So I think just planning accordingly. Smartphones, everything's going to go up. There's RAM on all that, so it's going to have a significant impact on everything we buy electronic.
Interesting. We talked about this a handful of years ago during the pandemic too, where we saw this big spike of equipment, and we had logistic problems and all kinds of other things, which caused all kinds of issues throughout the world. We see repercussions, or saw some of that last year as people were refreshing 5 years after COVID happened, that people were replacing their laptops and whatnot. So what Kyle's talking about, you will see this come again in a nice big wave in a couple of years coming through again. So it's a big deal. Speaking of supply chain and whatnot, one of the other things that I would throw in here that I think is a big deal is shadow AI. I think shadow IT in general is a big deal, but most organization, I have a friend that works for one of the largest banks in the country, and he said one of the biggest things that they're dealing with is the fact that AI is in everything. And so before they can bring tools in, they have to do a deep investigation. What is it? What does it touch? How do we put guide rails in it, et cetera? So that whole understanding of what's in there, I mean, it's in everything at this point, right? I mean, almost every tool you bring in has some sort of AI built into it. And if you don't have the insights into it and you can't detect that, there's no way that as an organization you can protect it, which means you have other concerns going on, data leakage, LLM abuse, all kinds of problems on it. But again, we can get deep into the scary details of cybersecurity in another podcast.
That was another one of my thoughts earlier about, with litigation was data breaches, right? I think this will be a big year where we start to see data breaches related to the use of certain LLMs, in a unsecure manner of, is someone just threw in a tool or vibe coded some type of application in, didn't properly put the controls around it and processed customer data, PII, PHI, whatever it may be, and it gets leaked somewhere, right? And so I foresee seeing some of the first litigation cases related to that.
Just a mild tangent off of that briefly. I know a lot of people don't love reading the EULAs, but most of them have very clearly written into those that the organizations you work with have no liability. So your Microsofts, your Alphabets, et cetera. When these things happen, which it feels like it's inevitable that it will, they currently have no liability, and people are accepting those when they start to use the tool. So something to keep in mind as you're going through this process.
I think you mentioned vibe coding. I'm just going to spin off of that and get away from the scary security stuff and privacy stuff with it. The other interesting trend I think that is going through is the vibe coding side going into more of the masses side of it. I think that's going to see a lot more progression through 2026. I think if you look at 2025, I think the coders, the actual people that the developers have been doing that side of, 2025 saw a tremendous growth in that area sides of those, and that it was kind of the year of coding, where AI really rose to prominence in coding side with it. And I think the extension into the overall vibe coding side out to the masses sides of it, through those tool sets, is going to perforate out far more, where people will be able to very easily through these tools build small applications to get things done for themselves. I know Google released that in their gem sides with it. It's not in the workspace version yet, but it is on the personal side that they brought in their Opus, app builder to build little mini gems that are micro app sides on it. So Microsoft added into Copilot a little app builder side of it. I mean, these are all kind of earlier sides, but they're starting to move. And I think, I think Todd just dropped a comment. The impact of this to the SaaS market is going to be interesting to watch, because if you can easily build something very quickly that is purposeful to get the task done very quickly side, those are solutions that SaaS's usually were built off to sell. And I think it's going to be it's going to become a lot easier to solve through the advent of these vibe coding sides. And my tangent to what Nate was saying, the security of how this all gets secured again is where I think the labs have to get involvement there too, to make sure there's proper protections into those things as well for the end user side, that they're not left to their own devices too terribly side to make a bad choice they're not aware of how they're using those app stuff on it. So to create some gates to protect the people to still get the outcomes they're looking for very quickly and powerfully side of those. But I think micro teams and micro apps on those things, I think of use of those will continue to perforate in 2026.
And so just to continue on with the vibe coding, and so I think there's opportunities for revenue generation, right? If you are looking to, be a developer, and your enterprise organizations that you use on a day-to-day basis, their developers are using this in their workflows. I've got friends that work in large enterprise as, senior software engineers. They're using it to take care of the little stuff that just is time consuming. And then they use their actual knowledge of, deep level understanding of code to put in the critical components that AI maybe doesn't know how to do quite yet. But with that being said, I think there's also, so not just revenue generation, but there's efficiency gains. And, cost reduction for enterprises as well that want to build out their own custom little applications is, Kyle and I were just talking yesterday, there was an application that I had demoed, earlier in the summer, and they wanted over $100,000 a year in order to subscribe to their SaaS application. And unbeknownst to that, because Kyle wasn't aware of that application, but he also went and developed basically the same exact application because we knew that we had some type of need. Kyle went in, developed an entire application. Now CIT, we don't have to go spend the extra $100,000 this year in order to subscribe to that software. We can use that extra $100,000 on whatever else we want to use it for. So there's tremendous opportunities to reduce the cost. Again, these are applications that don't put critical data in it in the first place, right? And so there wasn't all the deep security concerns that we had, other than, now we have a piece of software to manage and maintain, but we're not concerned about data leakage or anything like that, but we still got to save money, right?
Yeah, it solved a purpose, it solved a problem, and it was able to be built without, being the coder, but just being the orchestrator and the director side of where it's at. I was listening to a podcast side, and they brought up Boris, and I forget his last name. I apologize. The developer at Anthropic who built Claude Code side of it did release some tweets over the holiday break in 2025 side of how he uses Claude Code inside of those. And he detailed out his entire setup of how he goes through those. And he runs 15 separate agents simultaneously. He has 5 terminal windows open, and he has 10 running in the web side within the Claude Code that he orchestrates. And he confided, he says, right now, Claude Code is writing 100% of Claude Code. He's no longer writing it, he's orchestrating it through all his agent sides of what he's doing, sides with it. And between his team, from the end of 2024 to end of 2025, Anthropic measured over 60% improvement in efficiency of their team side by doing those sides. And I guarantee that's probably only half the year where they really started to go, because Claude Code really didn't, kind of grew out during the course of the year side with it. But it was just a very unique demonstrations of the power and kind of shifting to this, of learning how to be an orchestrator and not necessarily the doer sides of those is where a lot of the value is going to drive from people on how you work through that. You have to kind of start thinking differently of your approach side of it to say, I don't need to be the one doing it. I need to focus on the outcomes. I need to focus on the quality. I need to focus on what needs to get done. And you're managing a lot of microtaskers. The same thing that they kind of got into that was kind of questioned back to him in his explanation I thought was interesting is that people were saying, how do you keep track of 15 different things going on at one time? You basically said, I just manage the notifications. So I give it the task, and it lets me know when it needs something, and I check it. He goes, I'm not watching 15 screens. He goes, I have the one terminal I'm working on. The other ones are a notification. When they need me, I move over to it and I look at it. He goes, it's like you have 15 employees checking in, says, hey, I need something. You talk to them, go through it, and you get back to your main task. He goes, I'm just tasking them out, and I use the notifications within Claude Code to let me know when it needs. And then it's interesting because they added and they coded the ability now that Claude Code will notify on an Android phone if it needs you. So if one of his web askers needed to go through it, so he's basically been building this out to kind of work within Anthropic's workflow, which I thought was super interesting side of it, but it's kind of manifesting that that's what the market needs to go through it. So it's going to be exciting to watch as that goes through, but you can just see the multiplier that it can do for people when you can start to think differently. I think Apple's little marketing slogan really applies extremely well. I think if you can think different and manage your approach, what you can accomplish can be, tremendous as you go through with these tools, and they're only getting better to go through it. So experimenting and using those and getting through those sites, I think can really drive a lot of excitement for people to use it, to go through it. Because I know the negative sentiment I read is very negative on AI from a lot of areas. And for good reason. I understand the fear and the concern sides with it, but I'm an optimist and I'm a technologist. I get excited by it. I tend to look for the excitement side because I can see the possibilities. I think there's just so much tremendous things that can be come to fruition from these things that were limiters in the past just by the sheer amount of time. Can't stay up 24/7. You can't hire armies of people to get these things done you like to get done. But when you can have work, task agents taking care of, orchestrated micro tasks that you assign them to do to build out, and they can run 24/7 size of those, your limits is really what you can actually think of and what you can orchestrate. So becoming master orchestrators are going to really, I think, outpace tremendously people who are not. I don't see how you're going to be able to keep up, because they essentially have armies that they can run to get things done. And I think that's where people need to focus their time and energy and spend time learning how to do. And I think you just have to start using it. You got to start playing it. There's a tremendous amount of information, and the AI will help teach you, quite honestly. So I think if embracing through that side of it, I think you can get a lot of great things.
Yeah, one comment there at the very end, the AI will teach you. It's something that I think is also really interesting, because a lot of people will say, AI will also do, brain rot, right? Like you're not thinking anymore. I've actually found some of the AI to be very helpful in teaching you. So I forgot if it was Grok at the time. If you go take a look at a lot of these AI platforms, they'll show you the steps that they're taking in order to come up with their answer. Again, sometimes the final output is actually wrong, right? We all acknowledge that. But looking at how the models logically step through a process, and then just being able to take that and say, how would I approach the next situation if I didn't have this model in front of me? Learned a lot about how my own, sometimes cognitive bias, will influence my own, what I think is the answer when it comes up with something slightly different, and trying to say, oh, maybe I actually need to think different. So I had inherent bias.
And you can literally prompt it to be, to challenge your thoughts and challenge your thought process, and go through, voice chats with it and say, I want you to challenge my thoughts here. I want you to give me a counter perspective. I want you to act in those sides of it. I want you to call out the good and bad to where you do have cognitive bias, because we all have it. We have our backgrounds, and that forms who we are. Sides of it. It can give you a lot of those unique perspectives. They have tools built into these new things. Notebook LM is the best AI product in the market as far as for this sides of it that you can put in, very information and learn a tremendous about in a lot of different forms, however you want to see it. But I think just using these tools to really go deeper and learn. I've learned so much by using AI. Again, I get the brain rot. It can be, if you're using it like a smart Google, it definitely can be brain rot. If you're just giving the AI your thoughts and taking its first response, yeah, you're doing yourself a disservice there. I think you do need to be engaged. You need to stay in the control seat. You're the decision maker through those things. Don't advocate your decisions to the AI. I would not do that. You need to use it, again, use it as thought party, use it to challenge your thoughts, use it to enhance who you are. You go through those things and use it for the powerful tool that it is, because it's a tremendous resource there that you use when used properly. I think you can get a ton out of it, between the quizzes and the other sides of it, and the ability to teach you different technologies you didn't know in a really rapid short period of time, in the way that you learn. I'm a visual learner. I like the infographics. I like the slideshows of those things. I don't like reading 50 pages. I like the audible. I like the visual.
I think the one more thing that I'd add is, when you're talking about having it challenge you, right? I think this is also an important distinction when trying to talk about AI, as everyone continues to adopt in 2026, is the AI services are designed to try and keep you in the AI, right? So they'll often say, that's a great idea, why, and try and keep you engaged and make you feel good using it. I personally find that wildly annoying, and I don't want to talk to it anymore. So, but in some of the rule sets, like in some of the models I've done, I've said, you are not my friend. I want you to challenge me. Do not be positive. Only give me factual info, and, tame down the excitement. And I find that I actually prefer using those ones, because it doesn't always agree with me, right? I'll say, well, have you considered this? And so you can tune them as well, is really what I wanted to get to. So
So so when you're chatting, it comes back and says you're an idiot.
Yeah.
You go, okay, perfect. That's what I want.
that's what I want to hear.
Worst idea I've ever heard, Nate. That's what you want to, which is good. I think that's right. And it was interesting because that was what ChatGPT, OpenAI did in 5.2 was a lot of, they added that the more personalization, fine tuning. I think to your comment, because a lot of people are finding that. I think it was at 5, or I think 5 was pretty annoying that way. That it was just like over the top, just constantly trying to drag on the stuff. You're like, stop. I don't need all around. I just need the answer, move on. So you can fine tune it. And I do similar things.
Well, we've covered a lot of topics today, and I've been making notes on the side because I think we're going to deep dive into a lot of these things. The vibe coding, more on the AI to watch out for, always talking about zero trust and thinking about those shadow IT. If I could round robin really quick, number one opportunity you think is going to come this year for businesses specifically?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll give it a shot. I mean, I think the answer is, and you'll not be surprised to hear it because it's a podcast and I have to, but it depends. You knew it was coming.
Just one of the year.
It really does, because it's going to be dependent on what an organization needs. And I would say the opportunity is going to be finding ways to optimize the use of AI. And that could be as simple as we mentioned, there's a tool that we spend $100,000 on. That's a great opportunity for us to reinvest that dollar amount into something else. That could be something that would be the top of your list. Let's say you don't have the wherewithal to create that, but you could use a partner, IT as an example, that could do it for $20,000. That's a huge win. I now saved $80,000 this year and $100,000 into perpetuity going forward. And now I've got the ability to invest in other things. So those are the types of things that are in front of us and why AI is a big deal. Now, that's just using a tiny little piece of it, but that's an easy answer. That could be a huge win for an organization, or it could be a new tool that they need to do where they need to create as a manufacturer, as an example. You may want to have a tool that allows you to do preventative maintenance. And this tool that you vibe coded through AI now allows you to automate that process. I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities in front of organizations today, but what's dependent on the success and the outcome is going to be what's the biggest need for them as an organization for 2026.
Yeah, for me, I was going to say strategic planning and initiatives on how to truly capitalize on AI. Again, we already had AI and things like, video cameras and surveillance, systems and everything like that. But I feel like 2025 was really the year of the maturity and hype of AI. And I think we've kind of crossed that, right? It's not like when the first open AI models came out to the public, everyone was extremely awed by the power of it. Everyone now knows AI is capable. So now how do you actually put it to work in a business? And that's where I think the businesses have, through 2025, played catch up going, what is possible, but we don't have any plans related to it now. And now they're actually going to sit down in 2026 to say, how do we put this to work for us to actually turn, revenue generation or, efficiency drives? And really, to Todd's point, is reallocating funds around in order to make it happen.
Yeah. I think it's just I'm just going to echo a lot of the same comment sides. I think it's, to my earlier comment, you can see the labs are getting to this optimization phase again, of getting better use and driving it to more use cases within the user sides of those to drive it out. And I think we will see that extend into the business. We've seen great announcements from Microsoft come out at their Ignite at the end of 25 that kind of, purposed around those things of making Copilot, far more usable directly into the business to get to those operational use cases quicker, sides of those to move beyond just helping writing email sides of those to getting into, creating the ability to have, agent workers inside those sides that are licensed as your sides. I think we will start to see that to start to begin within company size of those. It's certainly going to be a longer road side of it. The start of that will start to show out through 2026 is what I think is going to happen. I think it'll be good, exciting times, but there's going to be a lot of prep work side that's going to require, and a lot of planning sides for those to get it ready for those worlds. But the beginning of that is already shaped up at that in 25. And I think we'll see that optimizations and actually start to see results coming from that as beyond the chat and into digital co-worker sides of those will start to show throughout 26, the beginnings of that.
Well, 2026, it'll be a big year for a lot of those new exciting tools. Well, thank you so much, Kyle, Todd, and Nate, for joining us today.
Thanks for listening. If you liked today's episode, share your thoughts with us. Like, subscribe, or reach out at info@citsolutions.net. For more, visit citsolutions.net/podcast. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode.
Stop.